The US election is on a knife edge. Trump once again has outperformed the polls, but it does look like Biden has the easiest route to entering the White House. Last night was pretty stressful. If anyone stayed up, I suppose up until about 2 a.m., you will have had the same emotions as all of us. Trump won Florida, outperformed the polls, and a series of southern states which sort of fell to, or he retained, which there had been some hope could flip to the Democrats, Texas, for example. But with mail-in ballots trickling in, especially in the Rust Belt, it does seem like Biden has the most obvious path to victory. We'll talk you through all the nail-biting developments of the past 24 hours, and we'll also be speaking to two brilliant guests in yet-to-be-called swing states. Nomiki Konst is in Arizona and Sarah Jaffe in Pennsylvania. Really delighted to have both of those guests in states which are yet to be called. I'm also joined in the studio by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
I had 4 hours sleep. I went to bed at 4:30, woke up at 9:30, so 4.5 hours, tell a lie. You've done really well selecting those two guests, by the way. Those could be the two states that decide who is the next inhabitant of the Oval Office.
Well, they will be, basically. Okay, we're going to go through the night's events. So, as I've already said, there was a major freakout when Florida fell to Trump. It looked like, initially, that Trump was leading in many states that we thought Biden was going to win, including in the Rust Belt. Knowing that mail-in ballots would probably favor the Democrats, and none of this was a surprise, Biden called for patience.
We feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election.
People like the graphics.
We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted. Every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good.
So you could hear the horns there. Biden has been sort of consistently speaking to drive-through rallies. Obviously, that's more COVID safe. Trump hasn't been doing the same. We're going to go now to Trump. He wasn't so keen on all votes being counted.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. So our goal now is to ensure the integrity for the good of this nation. This is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it.
We'll be talking about Trump's attempt to steal the election as the show goes on. First of all, what I want to do is talk you through the electoral map as it currently stands, how it developed, which we can get up now. So hopefully in a moment you're going to be able to see the map of all the states and the race to get to 270 electoral votes. Can we get this up? Perfect. So we're going to go through them sort of one by one. So Florida was the first to get called. Massive swing state, 29 electoral votes. Donald Trump won it last time. There was an expectation Biden could win it this time, but a reasonably comfortable win for Donald Trump in the end. That was partly because whilst the suburbs moved towards Biden, people in urban areas, and especially Latino men, voted for Trump more than they had in 2016. Then we can go to Texas. So Texas has been traditionally a Republican state, but there was some hope it could flip Democrat this time around. I mean, it didn't. Very comfortable there for Donald Trump. North Carolina, again, polls were suggesting Biden would win that. Trump at the moment is winning that. It hasn't, all the ballots haven't been counted, but most people seem to be calling that for Donald Trump. And Georgia. We can go to Georgia now. Georgia, again, People were hoping this could swing to Joe Biden. The polls were suggesting he'd win by 2. In fact, again, it looks like it will go to Donald Trump, although the New York Times is suggesting that could still be in play. So in general, the Southeast wasn't as fortuitous for Biden as he had hoped, but there still is a clear route to victory, and it goes via the Rust Belt, especially. So we can get the map back up. So it's the Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which went from the Democrats to Donald Trump in 2016, which won the presidency for him. As you can see there in Michigan, Biden is winning. We can probably move to Wisconsin, where Biden is also winning. And Pennsylvania, which is a very interesting state. We're going to be talking in detail to Sarah Jaffe about that later. Trump winning by quite a large margin, but there is still 20% of the vote to be collected, and much of that is mail-in, and people are expecting that to skew very heavily to Biden. So that state very much in play. And then key, if we go to the west, the southwest, we've got Nevada and Arizona, which initially looked like they were going to Trump, but Biden has taken the lead, and most people are calling those 2 states for Joe Biden. The route to 270 could either be via winning the 3 Rust Belt states, which would get him to 273, or if he loses Pennsylvania, he could make it up by winning Nevada and Arizona. So there's some clear paths: Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Biden is president, or Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Biden is president. Let's talk about this in detail. First with Nomiki Konst, who is in Arizona. That's one of those key states. That's one of the key states in Biden's path to victory, especially as Pennsylvania looks difficult. If he wins Arizona and Nevada, then he just has to win Michigan and Wisconsin, which does seem quite likely. Nomiki, how has your past 24 hours been?
I didn't really sleep. I've been trying to take walks. I had a little bit of mezcal last night. That's my last 24 hours.
Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I know that you and all your American colleagues are going to be super busy at the moment, so we really appreciate you coming on here to talk to our curious, predominantly British, although somewhat international audience. So first of all, can you tell me about Arizona, where you are, because it does seem like this could be one of the key states in the path to Biden's victory. How confident are you at the moment from what you're seeing that Biden is going to take the state?
So what's interesting about Arizona is Arizona actually, people say, oh, it's so right wing, it's so red, because the Tea Party organized in Arizona and they were able to take over the legislature and do some really stark things. But Arizona, I worked in Arizona. I went to the University of Arizona. It worked in politics. In 2006, we actually flipped Arizona blue. There was a Democratic governor. The Congress was won that year. The Democrats won. It was a year when Republican approval ratings were very low because of the Iraq War. So that is the last time Arizona actually flipped blue. So it has happened before. And there is a legacy of Democrats in Arizona, like the Udall family, for instance. So what's interesting right now is where I am right now in Tucson, Arizona. I'm in a district that Gabby Giffords once held, but also Martha McSally, who is a Republican, who just lost her Senate seat to Gabby Giffords' husband, strangely enough. This is a district that's always been a swing district, and it is overwhelmingly turning out for Biden right now. So I think what you're going to see is places that have been historically on the cusp or a little bit more conservative turning more blue. And what's really unique about that is that it is the inverse of what is happening nationwide. You look at swing districts in New York State, for instance. New York is supposed to be this big blue state. New York Democrats are losing several seats in New York, whether it was races that were swing districts by 20, 30 points to Republicans, or they're actually losing seats like Max Rose's seat in Staten Island and Brooklyn, or Congressman, I forgot his name, I'm forgetting it right now, a congressman in Long Island, Tom Suozzi, who just was defeated by a Republican. That is crazy because those are swing districts that have been held by Democrats. So there's two separate things happening from the Sun Belt versus the Rust Belt. And I think that's what we're going to have to look at deeper after this election is what is turning those votes. And I'm going to say probably in Arizona has to do with the Latino vote.
I want to talk about the Latino vote, and in the context of where Biden has underperformed. It seems like it's going okay for him in Arizona at the moment, but obviously there were high expectations for him in the Sun Belt, which for the most part, haven't come to pass. So Fox, can I get up our polling versus reality graphic? So we can look now at, and this is not to blame the New York Times. I'm not questioning their polling methods. I'm just saying Trump has outperformed them. Let's get up North Carolina. So North Carolina, apologies, 15 electoral college votes. The NYT poll average, their final polling average was +2 for Biden. It's currently +1.5 for Trump. Only 95% counted, but people are calling it for Trump. Florida down there, you can see +2 for Biden was the final polling average. It's actually +3 for Trump. That's basically now a final result. Georgia there, and the NYT final poll average was +2 for Biden. In reality, +1.5 for Trump. Now, the NYT are suggesting that Biden could eventually win that, but it's not going to be by the kind of margins they were predicting. And then in Texas, people were expecting this to be incredibly competitive, +2 for Trump. In fact, +6 for Trump. Very comfortable for him. So I want, Nomi, your sort of analysis of why in these states Biden has underperformed or Trump has overperformed. Why were people shocked when Florida flipped for Trump? Not flipped, sorry, when Florida remained in Republican hands when Trump won it?
Well, I think a few things. I actually don't think the polls are that far off. They're all within the margin of error. So statistically, it's not as shocking. It's just, it was always going to be this close. And we knew that. I think the problem is that going into this election, there was this alternate media message, which was there's this big blue wave, turnout is 600%, which it is. What really shocks me is the down ballot races and how the polling in those races show Democrats ahead, and they're getting slaughtered in some races by 20, 30 points. So I don't know what's going on with that polling. But I think what happened in Florida and in Texas and possibly Georgia or North Carolina is one factor that was really hard to take into consideration was that Republican turnout right now is 3% higher than it was in 2016. Black voters are polling a little bit higher than they did in 2016 for Trump. Not a tremendous amount. It's not going to break into the base of the Democratic Party, but a little bit here, a little bit there, and that takes Trump over the edge with a whole lot of voter suppression tactics and this enthusiasm that he has from his base. And I think there is a silent Trump voter that basically just is swayed by the messaging of, especially in Florida, for instance, where there was supposed to be this like Latino strategy where Republican Ana Navarro was reaching out to Cubans in South Florida, trying to convince them to vote for Biden, but they heard communist, and that Cubans turned out for Trump. But we knew that going into Florida. So I really do want to see what are the numbers. Where is it that Biden didn't pick up? And maybe it's the Puerto Rican vote didn't turn out the way that they expected, or maybe women didn't turn out as much as they expected. Something did not add up on Biden's side in his assessment of Florida, which is why I think that was a big shock. And just last on Florida, this is actually tremendous, and I think this is important for the movement moving forward. Florida passed a $15 minimum wage with 61% this year. Yet, socialism, supposedly the message of socialism defeated Joe Biden. So maybe it's campaigning on the issues, right? Obviously, Biden's not a socialist, but maybe if Biden stood for the issues of socialism rather than fighting socialism and the messaging, he would have done a little bit more. We don't know. I also think that demographic shifts are going to be, they're just going to be so stark next time around that I don't know if we're going to see a map like this in Florida 4 years from now. Definitely not 8 years from now.
That's so wild that they voted. Well, loads of people must have voted for Trump and voted for a $15 minimum wage. I mean, I'm sure some people aren't surprised, but I mean, it sort of, it doesn't, fit into the clear sort of left-right divide that one would imagine. I want to bring up quickly an exit poll that was in the NYT that was shared really, really widely, and then get up a sort of couple of clips that have also been circulating specifically about Latino voters, and then get your view, and especially why Florida might have been different to Arizona. So can we get up these exit polls, Fox? So this is exit polls just from Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, because that's what the NYT decided were going to be the early states that would really decide what kind of race we're looking at. And what they find is that there's a 1.5 swing to Democrats compared to 2016, and a 0.5 swing to Democrats compared to 2016 among white and college grads. And so you've got older people, white people swinging slightly to the Democrats, to Biden as compared to Clinton. But then you've got most other people swinging slightly to Trump compared to 2016, and especially the Cuban Americans, but then also Hispanic Americans in general, and urban areas, which I suppose is closely related to the Latino votes. And when that first got sort of circulated, that exit poll, an analysis that got quite a lot of traction was that this was Biden had completely taken for granted the Latino vote. I want to get up a video in one moment. It's video 6, Fox. And this is when Biden, in a sort of town hall meeting, is asked about his and Obama's terrible record, actually, when it came to deportation of mainly Latino people when Obama was president. He's challenged on it, and take a look at his response.
In those 8 years, there were 3 million people that were deported and separated from their families. Yeah. We had this classification of families.
Well, you should vote for Trump.
Families.
You should vote for Trump.
And no.
So it says vote for Trump. If you're asking me, he asked a question that didn't make him seem like a Trump voter, so I don't know why he said that. Another thing that's been circulating is this piece from Politico earlier in the year. So it's a piece about how Democratic insiders are saying Biden is taking the Latino vote for granted. We can get up a quote from that. So the quote is, "I do not think that the Biden campaign thinks that Latinos are part of their path to victory," says Jess Morales-Roquetto, the former digital organizing director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. "If you don't think Latinos are part of your path to victory, then you do what they're doing." And also, people are pointing out the fact that actually Bernie's big strength was with Latino voters. So in Texas, Bernie won 39% of the Latino vote compared to Biden's 29%. In California, he won 49% of the Latino vote compared to Biden's 19%. And Bernie's big win in Nevada was achieved by gaining 53% of the Latino vote compared to Biden's 17%. What's your analysis of this, Nomiki? Do you think that analysis, that the reason why there were these shocks a shock is kind of overstating, but disappointments in Florida was that the Biden campaign had, for some reason or other, taken for granted the Latino vote?
We have to be very clear that the politics, the politics of different Latino groups based on what wave they came, why they left their families, what generation they are. So the Cuban American population is very conservative. Of course, they fled the island in leaving, their homes behind, and they have their conservative politics. But if you look to North Florida right now, like Orlando, where Puerto Ricans have settled, they're much more working class. They left their island because Donald Trump did not deal with the storm. And I worked on the island that year, and it was horrifying to see hundreds of thousands of people leaving their homes because they didn't have power, they didn't have water, they couldn't get access to medicine, they were moving elderly to Florida. So the politics of those two groups are very different. I don't really think any Democrat has tried earnestly to win the Cuban vote in the last 30 years. I just don't think it's something that is really ever on the map. It's sort of something like, okay, if you can get a few, then maybe it influences Florida, where it does come very tight. But in Texas, for instance, where you saw Latinos turn out for Trump, what's important about that is it was primarily Mexican American men. And there has been some writing about this like machismo Trumpian thing, and how that touches different cultures. I mean, I'm Greek. I see it in my community with Greek men. There's a machismo-ness to it. And what's interesting to me, though, is that it wasn't with that with Clinton. Like Hillary lost white men for sure in the Rust Belt because of sexism and 30 years of like Fox News attacking her and trade policies, right? But she didn't lose the Latino vote. They actually invested heavily in states like Nevada, which is now too close to call right now. In Arizona, which is still a little bit too close to call, I'm still going to say it's going for Biden. And Texas was supposedly on the map this cycle, and it definitely wasn't. But Texas was also supposed to be on the map last cycle for Clinton, and it wasn't. So something in their electoral strategy, presidential elections and primaries are surgical. And yes, Bernie did very well with the Latino base in the primary. Part of that, it's not like he was the first progressive to lean into the Latino population, the Mexican, especially the Dreamer population in the United States. Dreamers have been organizing against the Obama administration for a decade. and trying to move them on issues. So they actually had a brand association with not being, this is not a brand that they were invested in. And Bernie alternatively showed up and knocked on doors. And that's what you should do as a politician. I don't know how that would have translated nationally. I think that we have to take a hard look at these numbers and think about what it's going to look like 4 years from now and what kind of candidate we think can appeal to these demographic shifts. And also, as a movement, just be very honest with ourselves. And I think you guys are going through the same experience, that we have to sharpen up our political instincts and play a little bit rougher because, they defeated us. And I mean, maybe we would have won, maybe we wouldn't have, to be honest, because Republicans, they've been dealing with voter suppression. I mean, just one more thing to add to that. Obama in 2010 got a shellacking. If you remember, he said there was a shellacking, they lost the House. But 2010 was also a census year. And what also happened that year was we lost a decade of state legislatures. 1,200 seats were lost. Obama, his Democratic Party, pulled money out of state parties, which is how you organize and you recruit candidates to run these state legislatures. In the state legislatures, that's how we cut our congressional districts. And so now we're in another census year and we are losing seats. And this is how the state legislatures also do these gerrymandering and voter suppression tactics. So I actually look at the Obama administration and the Obama politics not being sharpened up to the Republicans and the games that they were playing. And as a result, we now potentially have 2 decades of voter suppression and gerrymandering that have been caused by the negligence of that leadership when it comes to politics. And I think as progressives, when we do take power, we have to think about these things in a much more sophisticated way than Obama did.
I want to get up, again, a couple more exit polls, and then I'm going to go to Aaron. Can we get up this exit poll from the NYT, Fox? It's graphic 11. And this is just to point out, to not overstate the case, because I feel like the movement has potentially overstated the case that, Latinos love Trump. They don't really. So you still can see a massive sort of racial gap between who votes for who. So it is, well, as you can imagine, on that left column, that's people voting for Trump, and on the right is people voting for Biden. So among white men in those 3 states, Trump wins 58%, Biden only 40%. Among Latino men, even though a few more voted for Trump this time than did last time, the Democrats are still winning by 61%, Biden's still winning by 61%. I also want to get up one more, so this is 11B, Fox, which is, because one of the puzzles here is, even if Trump loses, still not guaranteed, how can someone who told people to inject bleach in the middle of a global pandemic still retain most of his vote? And from that exit poll, this was the one statistic which I thought might have some explanatory force. So we can get up this. This is about white evangelicals and born-again Christians who are white. And this is 27% of voters, so a huge electoral block, 76% voting for Trump, people who really value or prioritize conservative social values, abortion, for example. Aaron, I want to go to you for your thoughts on the disappointing element of Biden's results in that part of the country.
Yeah, well, I wanted to sort of pose a question to Naomi, which is, to what extent do you think COVID cut across the sort of the pre-envisaged racial kind of divides here? So I'm sure there are many Latinos, for instance, who have small businesses, and they were going to back Trump simply because he was going to keep business going. Was that something that you think perhaps changed the narrative? Because generally speaking, people are saying, had there not been COVID, Trump would have won a landslide win. But I wonder if to some extent this perhaps helped Trump, particularly in somewhere like Florida. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
That's a fascinating question. Last night, and I wish I had the statistic available, but when we were doing coverage last night, I was shocked to see that in areas of the country, in districts where there have been a higher concentration of deaths related to COVID, especially in rural America, Trump was winning. So there's something going on. I'm in a red state. Well, I'm in Arizona right now, so technically it's still a red state. It may not be tomorrow. The COVID denial is visceral. It is people who've had COVID are denying Trump's exacerbation of this crisis, causing this crisis, and the economic effects of it. I went to a Trump rally and accidentally in Scottsdale, Arizona, in one of those Maricopa County districts that we're looking at right now. And when I interviewed folks and I said, this is the day after Trump got COVID, I said, what do you think of him getting COVID? They said, oh, it was in his plan. He told everybody he was going to go off the grid for 11 days. And then they suddenly pitted it. And I said, well, what about the economy? They said, well, that's Nancy Pelosi's fault, which doesn't even make sense at all. So I can't quite, this is so fascinating to me, like how people can vote against their interests. Is it because of the economy? Is it because, as you said, small businesses, they wanted to open up the economy immediately, which obviously has hit states like Arizona very, very hard. I mean, as Doug Ducey, the governor, the Republican governor, prematurely opened up the economy. And as a result, they had a horrifying COVID. It like swept Arizona in the summertime, and then he immediately had to shut it down again because he realized science. But folks, if we handled the shutdowns appropriately, then maybe these small businesses would have done better. And I think that's where Biden really lost his messaging, is the inverse of Trump saying, let's not shut down the economy, it's a hoax, blah, 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 should have been Biden saying, listen, folks, we're going to do this for 2 weeks. But it guarantees that we're not going to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious because this is like an experiment. This is the first major national election in the context of COVID. And I'm just curious as to how the electorate responds to that. Maybe it is, nobody thinks they get COVID. Nobody thinks they're going to be the one that falls ill or gets hit by the bus. That's always somebody else. And what their primary concern is, whether or not their kids can go to school, whether or not the business stays open. And I think maybe it's helped Trump. I don't know. I mean, it's an audacious claim, but I would have been one of the people. You look at Trump's polling in February and look at it before the election, it absolutely didn't help Trump. But I mean, maybe it did. I mean, he's remained so rock solid with his 2016 base. He's increased it somewhat, and especially the increases amongst minorities. I just wonder, perhaps that doesn't reflect some sort of sociological move towards Trump. It's just statistically there happen to be African Americans and Latinos who have businesses or want to pay less tax, and the context isn't necessarily a racial one. That's just my sort of Insta analysis. I'm not even there. Your thoughts be welcome.
Okay, I also want to
I think you're right. Go ahead.
Develop on that just slightly, into a question that I'm very interested in is, are you surprised at sort of the stability? I mean, it's fundamentally what Aaron was getting towards, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. You've got a president who's saying the most wild things, who seems completely incompetent, who seems almost out of his mind. And the polling has barely shifted in 4 years, barely shifted. Does that surprise you? How do you think that happened?
I think COVID happened, and what specifically related to COVID is just this massive turnout. I mean, there was no way to factor in that Republicans would turn out at this level on election day. I mean, it was very hard to measure this election. Clearly, mail-in ballots, we're going to be fighting over mail-in ballots. They worked very hard to suppress the votes, to go to the courts so that mail-in and early voting wasn't counted properly. I mean, there's a real fight that's going to happen there if it gets super, super close, and that's actually where the coup comes in, right? But in terms of the increased turnout or having the same numbers as 2016, I think that is related to this wave. I mean, to COVID, like how do you vote during COVID? It works both ways. Democrats are going to turn out at a higher rate, but in states like Arizona, 70% of Arizonans vote early. I mean, they've been doing that for years. Republicans, this is a Republican-led state. So that doesn't mean that it's going to be all Democrats voting early by mail. It means that Republicans are going to do it too. Whereas in other states, like Pennsylvania, voting by mail and voting early is likely to be very Democratic. So I don't know. I will say one thing that I'm going to say on my show in a few minutes, which is I think that Joe Biden is doing worse than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. It just doesn't seem that way because the turnout is just so much higher and he still might win. But I actually think he's doing worse. If you look at the percent, I mean, if Hillary Clinton was running the same exact race today, I think she'd be doing better than Joe Biden, is another way of saying it.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's a really novel analysis. I hadn't heard anyone with that take yet.
Hot takes for you all day.
Yeah, I like that. Your thoughts on that, Aaron?
Well, yeah, I think, the thing is, though, as it stands, Biden wins this through the Rust Belt. He wins it through Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe even Pennsylvania. So how do you reach that conclusion? Because clearly Clinton lost those places, primarily, I think, just because she was a woman and the wife of Bill Clinton. Irrelevant of what her manifesto was. It didn't matter what policies she was offering. So why do you think Biden's done worse than Clinton? How would Clinton have won those seats this time around?
So the margins are okay. So she lost 77,000 votes in the Rust Belt in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I guess you could throw in Ohio too if you want to. And that determined the election, right? And then the turnout was, we don't even know what the final numbers are right now. I mean, I have to look in to see if we have an assessment, but it is way past anything you could have imagined. So just by the sheer numbers of voters, increased numbers of voters turning out in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, that should send Biden over the edge. And it's still this close. So that, I think, is the concern. If you look at it percentage-wise, percentage of the vote in 2016, if you just increased the same exact percentage, you would have maybe 100,000 more voters or 200,000 more voters. I don't know what the number is going to be, but just looking at the margins are much, much, much slimmer this time. So if you were to reduce the vote, the margin of the loss would have been larger in 2016 if Biden had run.
I want to go to
Does
a
that make
super
sense?
chat.
And she won Nevada, by the way. Slam dunk, Nevada.
Yeah, true. I want to go to a super chat that I want to read before you go. So I've got Eric Williamson with a super chat. Hey, Nomi, love you on here. Heartbroken. We lost Ohio. Oh. Do you have a connection to Ohio, Nomi?
I mean, I'm an American.
There's a we there. There's a we there in Ohio. So I don't know if he knows something I don't. What I want to get from you before we go to Sarah Jaffe in the Rust Belt, is Biden going to win the presidency? Is he going to win Arizona? Can our viewers breathe a sigh of relief?
I think right now it's looking like he's picking up votes in Michigan, he's picking up votes in Wisconsin, and if the court battles do not happen in Pennsylvania, then I think he'll probably win, and Sarah will talk about that. But we've had some guests on our show who are in the highest turnout areas of Philadelphia. They've been preparing for this fight, but the turnout was extraordinarily higher than Obama in 2008 in those districts yesterday. So there's some hope. The numbers are really stark in Pennsylvania right now, but again, the highest turnout areas have not really been counted. So I think if we're looking at that path, he's going to win. It shouldn't be this close. It shouldn't have been this close in 2016. It should not be this close now. My concern, though, is how down ballot we were wrecked. And that freaks me out for the next decade. That freaks me out for redistricting. That freaks me out for the continuation of voter suppression. The Republican experiment has always been this political experiment by design, not by ideas. And I think that the media fell for this blue wave. And what you're seeing is a House where Democrats lost seats, didn't pick them up. You don't have the Senate. And it's going to be a big battle, no matter who's in the White House in 2021. And we've got to really sharpen up. So I think he carries it.
I suppose there's something reassuring there. We'll get the presidency, but they'll probably win the war by winning down ballot races and rigging everything. It's probably why you need more than to squeak the presidency if you want to change American politics, I suppose. Anyway, Nomi, we're gonna let you go now. Thank you so much for your time this evening. We massively appreciate it. Love having you on the show, and especially on such a important, crucial day in American politics. Keep your eye out in Arizona because we don't want Trump to steal the race. Keep alert.
Yeah, I'll do what I can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nomiki Konst. Before we go on to our next section, which is going to be on the Rust Belt, those crucial states in the Rust Belt, we'll go to a few super chats. James Bates with a $5, a big fan of the show. Shout out to my friend who watches Novara, Billy Abbott, who has come out. So congratulations. I couldn't recommend it more. Paul McDaniel with a tenner. Novara has helped keep me sane during this difficult year. Thanks and keep up the good work, guys. Monkey Baby Dance, great name. Thanks for your sound politics discussions. And Ellen Mervin, can I have a shout out to my partner, Joel? He introduced me to your show a couple years ago and I've been watching ever since. That's so kind. Shout out to Joel. We always appreciate it when you introduce us to anyone, your friends, your partners, your family, your neighbors. Right, let's go straight on to our next section. After you, if you're new to the show, hit subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. We want to get up to 100K real soon. We're very close, in fact. Okay, the next place we're going to take you to is the Rust Belt. Let's just get up that map one more time briefly so we can remind ourselves of what is in play, of why this district is so, or this region of the United States is so important. We can see that we can see now that Wisconsin has been called for the Democrats, for Joe Biden. Very important there. That means that Biden has now 237 electoral college votes. Michigan, we can go over Michigan, still in play. But again, Biden ahead, and we're expecting the final votes to swing towards the Democrats. Pennsylvania on 80%. As I've said before, Trump way ahead, but we think that the final 20% could be so weighted towards Joe Biden that it does swing Democrat. To discuss Pennsylvania, whether the Rust Belt will save Joe Biden in the same way that it destroyed Hillary Clinton. I'm joined by Sarah Jaffe in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. How are you doing, Sarah?
Angry? Is that a good answer? Some people have a guillotine in downtown Philly right now, and I kind of want to just go join them because that's about how I'm feeling too.
And tell me, again, Biden has underperformed in the Rust Belt, but it still seems like he's going to, squeak through, and that it is going to save him Wisconsin, Michigan, maybe Pennsylvania. What's the big story from that part of the country? Is it just that, disappointment from Biden, but not as disappointing as it could have been? What's the difference between 2016 and now? What's your big takeaway?
My big takeaway is that this president can be as bad as he is and still potentially win this thing. And the Democrats are really, really comfortable with squeaking through because they actually don't want to, as you were just saying, change the country. So they are entirely uninterested in winning by big margins. They are entirely uninterested really in fighting for those down ballot races, which has been true throughout the Obama administration. And they acted like they were kind of uninterested in winning Pennsylvania, which is going to be real funny if it's the state that everything comes down to, because there was a next to no ground operation in this state. They have put very little into winning anybody other than white suburbanites. And it shows because actually Pennsylvania is not made up of white suburbs mostly.
A point you've just made there, that they didn't do a ground game in Pennsylvania. That's very different from what's being sort of reported here. And even my impression was that everyone was obsessed with Pennsylvania. Biden's been doing rally after rally after rally. But are you saying that on the ground, it's a very different story?
Rallies aren't a ground game. Rallies aren't organizing. And especially when those rallies are like drive-ins in a pandemic, they're not the same as they would have been in a period where, people were excited about the candidate. The entirety of this race was run as if everybody was going to be so self-evidently angry at Trump that they would turn out in mass. And so I was looking at a Philly turnout map, for instance, and you want to know where the big drop in Philly turnout has been so far, is West Philly, which is my old neighborhood. It is where the University of Pennsylvania is. So some of that is probably college students who aren't here. Some of that is also that this is the neighborhood that's been tear gassed and under curfew and had tanks literally rolling through it in the last 6 months, and where Walter Wallace was killed. And so when Joe Biden's response to another Black man being killed by police in this city was, "Oh, I'm sorry, stop looting." That's it. Because I'm just deeply, deeply angry at the degree of just contempt for the people that the Democrats will, pay lip service to being their base. Slapping Kamala Harris on the top of the ticket was supposed to, make up for the fact that they made no effort to actually talk to Black voters in places like Philadelphia, which I said the other night, that will actually be what makes the difference in this election. That's whose absentee ballots you're waiting on, right? That's what they're counting on to swing this race. And if it happens, they will continue to treat everybody with contempt. If it doesn't happen, they will continue to treat Black voters with contempt, because for some reason, we're still operating in this country like the 3/5 compromise is still a thing, and Black votes are only worth 3/5 of white one. I'm just really angry today. I'm sorry.
So do you think that potentially, I suppose, while in 2016 they were sort of shocked because they'd ignored the white working class vote, and then it all swung to Trump, now because they're so obsessed with the suburbs, they've ignored the African American vote in the inner cities, or have they always ignored the African American votes in the inner cities? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is that they were obsessed with the suburbs in 2016, too, right? You can look back at this. And Georgia, which hasn't been called yet, I guess if they manage to win the Senate race there, it'll be with this guy that they pulled from the suburbs that was supposed to win the suburbs in the special House election in whatever year that was. And he lost. And then the woman who won that seat, Lucy McBath, is the mother of a young man who was killed by a racist and who is, a movement activist. So, once again, they paid no attention to someone like Lucy McBath and put all their money into John Ossoff. And that just is the strategy for this part of the Democratic Party. They really think this. And, in 2016, they said it. Ed Rendell is a former governor of Pennsylvania, knows what this state is made up of, said to reporters last time, oh, for every, white working class vote we lose to Trump, we'll pick up 2 in the suburbs, which like that never added up. So, they're going to behave way about blacks until finally they get a wake-up call. I don't know. And Pennsylvania, it's interesting because I'm kind of getting annoyed at the hot takes, which are like, shouldn't have to spend so much time thinking about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania actually kind of looks like America. It's got a big city on one end, right, with a lot of black people, a lot of poor white people. It's got a lot of rural space in between. It's got a big college town in the center, and then it's got the Rust Belt on the West End. And so this is actually a state that, like, if you had any sense at all, you would think about winning with a strategy that actually caters to all of those different parts of it. And they don't do that. And they continually decide that some particular voter is going to be the one that wins the thing. And it's been white suburbanites for a while now, even though that strategy keeps losing or like barely eking out a win. And they don't actually have to think.
You're cracking up ever so slightly. I think maybe Fox is going to be able to sort that out. I'm not sure. Hopefully, I want to go to Aaron though for his thoughts on the Rust Belt as a sort of state of as a site of contestation in this election. Then we're going to talk about Trump's attempts to stop late counting and try and steal the election. Aaron.
Yeah. Also, I'd roll these into questions as well to Sarah. So, the first is about a month ago, the polling average in Pennsylvania was giving Biden a 7-8% lead. So that's not the margin of error, if Trump wins it. And then secondly, we were told, Sarah, that this was the year of the Biden Republican, that we were going to see Republicans en masse go towards Biden. And obviously, given Pennsylvania is such an important state, a bellwether state, and like you say, given it's so reflective of the United States more broadly, what's your experience been of that? Has that just been a complete non-event? Have areas where you've been in the state which are historically Republican, have you seen Biden sort of posters in windows and sort of activists working on his behalf, which you in areas and in counties you'd never seen before?
Nope. So the number that I saw this morning is that Trump had increased his percentage from 2016 among Republicans. So the Republican is a lie. The Clinton Republican was a lie. The one, ironically, that actually had the best turnout turning Republicans into Democrats was Obama in 2008. It turns out that when you give people something to vote for, even Republicans will cross lines. The thing that's interesting to me right now, too, is the way that when you're looking at some of these states that Trump won, in Florida, right, they voted for a $15 an hour minimum wage, despite Trump winning. In California, that's not a Trump state, but they voted to re-enfranchise formerly incarcerated people. They voted for medical marijuana in Mississippi and legal marijuana in New Jersey. All over the place, policies get big results across lines. And it turns out that if you maybe ran a campaign where you promised to do anything, you might get more voter excitement. But instead, the Biden ads that I was seeing, Joe Biden won't ban fracking. Tell me what Joe Biden would, because I've got no idea. Biden will not raise your taxes if you make under $400,000 a year. What is Joe Biden going to do? I have no idea. Still have no idea if anything. It's is on third way Democratic Party strategy, which again is always based around the suburbs, it's always based around white people, and it's always based around this mythic idea of like the swing voter who just like moves a little bit to the left and the right from the Democrats, when the real swing people who vote or decide not to vote.
We're going to talk about the legal wrangling that's going to go on and sort of Trump's statements about the validity or made-up election fraud. First of all, though, what I want to show you is a video of him before the votes started being counted, because we've known throughout the whole campaign Donald Trump has been saying, you know, I'm not going to lose, and if I do, it will be because of fraud, etc., trying to put the results in doubt. When he made this comment on polling day, I thought that basically he'd kind of given up, and it's only after the results sort of improved a little bit for him that he's changed his tune. So let's look at him before the results started coming in.
I'm not thinking about concession speech or acceptance speech yet. Hopefully we'll be only doing one of those two. And you know, winning is easy. Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not. But I think we have, when you see rallies, the likes of which in the history of this country, probably in the history of the world, nobody's ever seen before. There's a tremendous love going on in this country. And there's really a tremendous unity. There's a tremendous unity. Nobody's ever seen that, where you take an airport and the airport's not big enough to hold the crowds. Nobody's ever seen a thing like that. And our opposition, as you know, would have a few people sitting in circles, and that's okay. That's not abnormal. That's not abnormal, actually. I mean, that's the way it is. But we would get crowds of 50,000 people, 45,000 people, more. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. So it was an honor. They're great people. These are people that they appreciate what we did, and they also remember before I got there and before we all got there. This group has been with me. A lot of them are very young, but they've been with me, many of them, for a long time, right? A long time. And I really came here to thank you all, and then I'm going to say, and get immediately back to work.
So that was him seeming like he was going to concede, basically. I'll do one of those two. He's changed his tune, though. Let's look at some tweets from today. So the first one: last night I was leading often solidly in many key states, in almost all instances Democrat run and controlled. Then one by one they started to magically disappear as surprise ballot dumps were counted. Very strange. And the pollsters got it completely and historically wrong. Then he goes on. They are finding Biden votes all over the place in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So bad for our country. Now, Sarah, I know you have to go and take part in another call. All you guys are in such high demand at the moment. Can I get you to sort of finish by just talking about how you see this developing? Is it going to be the case that you're going to have a sort of Florida situation, Florida 2000 in Pennsylvania, where this is going to go to the Supreme Court and everyone is going to be battling about which votes count and which don't, or which do, which don't? Or is this just sort of Donald Trump freaking out on Twitter?
It's interesting, right? That first video was kind of a thing that I was talking about with some folks yesterday, that like, it's never struck me that Donald Trump desperately wants to be president. What Donald Trump likes doing is having big old racist rallies with hundreds of people, thousands of people, right? Like that's what he enjoys. Doing the job is just a lot of work that he doesn't like to do. And as a person who is morally and politically opposed to work, I would like to say, Donald Trump, please, we support you, retire. But the Republican Party, as you mentioned, bringing up, you know, the trauma that we all remember from the year 2000, the Republican Party has long been in the business of trying to suppress the vote, as Nomiki was saying right before she left. They know that they don't win by actually counting every vote. They know they don't win through massive turnout. They win by suppressing the vote. They win by not counting late-breaking votes. They win by distraction, and they win by, I mean, frankly, packing the courts with their people and thinking about power in a way that the Democrats just clearly don't and have not learned to. In, again, my entire lifetime, I have never seen any of them get serious about power. And so, yeah, I don't know if things are going to go to the courts. I imagine that it will depend on the states and the state parties more than it will depend on Trump. I'm sure some big money Republican donors are happy to bankroll court cases. And yeah, but I think that the big problem here is going to be that, like, there are no big rallies happening today. to count every vote. I'm seeing a few things called in a few places. Apparently there's a guillotine in Center City, Philadelphia right now in front of the hospital that has been closed for a while. But the thing that worries me as a replay of 2000 is just that like the Democrats don't look like they're going to try that hard. And that doesn't bode well for anything, even if Biden does end up winning and Trump does actually end up leaving.
Sounds like it's going to be a tense few days. Make sure you keep in touch with us about what's going on the ground in Pennsylvania. And thank you again so much for giving us your time this evening, because I know you guys are all, super busy, in loads of demand. Big day. Obviously, in America, I'm talking shit now. Sarah Jaffe, thank you so much for joining us. We'll speak soon. Big day in American politics. That's my analysis. Right, if you're new to this show, we've got 3,400 people watching. Please do hit the subscribe button. We want to get up to 100,000. And you'll probably know that we go live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Aaron, I'm going to go to you for your big takeaways, your big thoughts from this election. Are you surprised? What have you learned from these results coming in? Has it changed your understanding of American politics and political strategy in general?
Well, I didn't want to make any predictions because I don't think that's wise in politics right now. I thought it would be tighter than the polls were suggesting, but I always thought Biden was going to win. I didn't think it was going to be this tight, which is kind of crazy. What I would say, in many ways, I think the Republicans keeping the Senate and Biden winning the presidency is probably the best result that the Democratic establishment wants. Because what that means is that they don't have to do anything on a Green New Deal. They don't have to do anything on major economic reform. They don't have to make any structural changes to the American sort of economy or the Constitution or, drugs or carceral reform. Because what Biden can say is, yeah, I kind of leaned into that reformist bent in the final months of my campaign, but I haven't got the Senate. So for them, that is, I think, in many ways, the kind of dream scenario. However, that's very short-term and myopic, because in 4 years' time, what are people going to vote for? If Biden does win this, it's not a big if, but he may still not win it. But if he does win this, and then he has his inauguration early next year, it's just going to be a very strange moment, because people are clearly going to be happy that Trump's gone, but I don't think it's going to be euphoric, because you've got obviously the pandemic, and there's really no vision from the Democrats about how they want to run the economy. There hasn't really been since the great crisis after 2008. You have Obama come in with a big stimulus, but it probably wasn't big enough at the time. That's not going to be repeated here. And I just feel like, is this guy, is he the Brezhnev of American neoliberalism? Right? We're going to talk more and more about the sort of theme of gerontocracy in American politics. And it's a theme. It's a very strange political culture, extraordinarily conspicuous how many older people there are at the top of both political parties. But I think this could be a really interesting fork in the road. And the Democratic establishment's very happy to have it, but I think ultimately it's not going to redound to their benefit. Then finally, this whole idea of you occupy power as an anti-fascist, like the sort of the Popular Front government in France before the Second World War. It's about occupying power. It's not having power so you can change things. It's taking power so that the fascists can't get it. Similar thing with Syriza against the Golden Dawn. That's what some people would say. I think that's a stupid argument. And I think that basically that's going to be co-opted by establishment Democrats, by people in this country, people around in the Labour Party and so on. And it gives them a license to not really change very much. And all that's going to do, as we've seen for the last 25 years, is just make that problem even worse. And what they're doing is they're resting on this assumption that because there'll be more brown and black people in 10, 15, 20 years' time, which there will be, 1/3 of all kids in this country in primary schools are BAME, that magically means they're going to win. And what we're seeing today, and look, we've only seen a few exit polls about that, but there's a few cracks in that narrative. And so, yes, it's excellent that Biden wins. If Trump, Biden winning, first and foremost, has huge implications for geopolitics. China and Iran now completely change. The relationships with China and Iran completely change as a result of Biden winning the presidency. But in terms of what the economy looks like for the average working class American, I don't think it's really going to make any kind of significant shift. Is he going to have a big stimulus package? No. I mean, they're running this ginormous deficit. Not that matters because they have their own currency, the world's only hyperpower. But it's not in the DNA of the Democrats to really act decisively here, and that's not going to change with Biden.
I mean, the hope was in this election, like the ideal outcome would have been that you have Biden wins and then you have a tight Senate where you have Bernie Sanders basically holding the key vote, and then you can have Biden and Elizabeth Warren maybe sort of brought slightly to the left, implement a few progressive policies, the Democratic establishment in a way, because it would be led by him, sort of build up their base so they can win more confidently next time around. And, you know, a new generation is coming up through the ranks. What we have now instead is we have Biden, who has, it seems likely, it's not confirmed yet, but it seems very likely, the blue wave has not happened, that the Senate will stay in Republican hands. As you say, that means that Biden has every excuse he's ever wanted to not really implement anything. I mean, there's very little you can implement as a Democratic president when you've got a Republican Senate in this particular political climate, especially because they learned from the Obama years that if all you do is obstruct, it can actually work out pretty well for you. I think the Republicans are probably going to feel pretty confident about winning a presidential election in 2024. This result from Donald Trump is not the sign of a party in decline. Because when Obama won those 2 terms, people say, oh, the Republicans, they might never win again. Because of the demographic shifts that you're seeing in the United States, ethnic minorities growing, you know, various where people are moving. People sort of suggested, oh, yeah, the Republicans are going to have to dramatically change if they are ever going to win again. I think if you're a Republican strategist looking at this, you're going to say, look, if we put up someone who doesn't tell people to inject bleach, and we're not in the middle of a global pandemic, then we can walk this.
Totally. I mean, there's still some truth to that, of course. You've had the Democrats be incredibly competitive in Georgia, in Texas, in North Carolina, Nevada, New Mexico. You know, these aren't places they generally win over the last couple of decades. They have sometimes. They did under Obama, for instance, some of those states. But that's true. That's true. And it does feel, in a similar way actually to this country, a lot of big chunks of the country are quite soft. They could go either way. And I think what's not going to seduce voters at the next time of calling will be some kind of identikit guy like Biden. And quickly, you know, this works both ways. So we're saying that the Democratic establishment's very happy with this result. In a way, so is the Republican establishment, because they don't mind having Trump gone, right? They've got this old guy who's not going to be able to do very much. People are saying, please stop calling him old. He's 77. He's the oldest ever person to enter the Oval Office if he wins this. And they have the Senate. And they just think, right, we've got 4 years to prepare. We've got rid of this guy. Wow, he was crazy and chaotic, Donald Trump. And we can prepare going forward. And so in many ways, the kind of these insulated political elites within both parties will be quite happy with this result, which is a very strange way of looking at it. But there we are. And one more thing I'd want to say is, you know, when does the working class kind of appear on the scene in this whole conversation? Because right now it seems like you've got 3 forces in American politics. You've got the sort of Trumpian right. And even if there's a sort of better version of Trump next time round, he's going to be sort of a proto-Trump. You're not going to have some sort of return to a kind of Marco Rubio, slick, technocratic Republican. That's not going to happen. You've got that. You've got this kind of Lincoln Project, Biden, okay, large swathes of the left will go beneath this person. They'll get minorities, they get the young. You've got that. And then you've got the actual left. So the Justice Democrats, I think now have got 10 people in the House of Representatives, which is a big thing. And the fundamental reality now is for the left, they have to make sure that third tendency is the future of American politics. And frankly, I can only see in the long term it being that or the Trumpian thing. I don't see how Bidenism is the future of anything. It's the politics of managed decline. And so, look, it's fine. It's a sticking plaster. If it gets rid of Trump in 2020, great. But it's not a long-term political project in any meaningful sense.
I mean, it is. I mean, this whole electoral cycle has been, I mean, I suppose confounding. You know, you see people sort of on Twitter very confidently saying if he was more to the right, if he hadn't associated himself with Black Lives Matter, then he would have won a landslide. Or if he were more to the left, he would have won a landslide. And obviously, I mean, I would have liked him to be more to the left because I think that's the politics that the United States needs and that the world needs. I want an anti-imperial president. Biden's obviously not going to be that. But if I'm honest, I don't have that much confidence that if he had, taken on Bernie Sanders' platform, he would have won. Bernie Sanders, had a theory of change in the primaries, which was to massively increase turnout among working class voters, and it didn't quite come to pass. We could have quite easily been in a similar situation if he were the candidate. And this is not to say, this is to say I don't need to think that my kind of politics is going to be a shoe-in to the White House for me to hold it. This is not me having doubts about left populism as sort of like what the country needs, but just I look at this electoral cycle and it's difficult not to feel anything but a little bit depressed.
Well, I think there's two things here. Firstly, I agree with you. It's a holding pattern, in a sense, for both parties. Both establishments are quite happy with how this is panning out. But what I would say is Bernie Sanders or somebody with his politics probably wins Texas, right? They don't win Florida. Sanders would lose Florida worse than Biden for sure. I think he wins Texas. He wins Arizona. He wins Nevada. I think Georgia's probably more competitive. I think maybe North Carolina is more competitive. Then the question is, does he make those inroads where we're seeing actually Biden do quite well? You know, the white, blue-collar workers in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and so on, and also suburban voters. So it's a tough one. I think on balance, Bernie would do as well as Joe Biden. I think in different places. I don't think he would have been a shoo-in, I agree with you. But I do think a telegenic, charismatic person with Bernie's policies, by which I mean, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you could see how they could remake the political map, because you've got all these states now, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, which are just 2-3%, and all of a sudden, Texas is a big, big state. You know, it's not California, but it's a big, big state. And you could see how they could remake the sort of the political map of America. If you do that while keeping the Northeast, then you know you're looking at big majorities. And I think only the left of the Democratic Party can do that fundamentally going forward.
I mean, something that's going to be really interesting now, because there definitely was a situation where almost everyone sort of held their tongue about Joe Biden's flaws. So if you watch CNN or MSNBC, they're not going to talk about the fact that he was old, aging, was basically trying to not take part in the presidential election in case he fucked up, and win purely on the fact of being not Trump. No one really pointed that out because everyone was so desperate for Trump to lose. Now that Trump is out, well, again, I don't want to tempt fate, but now that it seems like Biden is going to win, but in a very disappointing way by only the narrowest of margins, and in such a way that basically this is going to be one of the weakest presidencies we've seen in recent history, we might now see a greater willingness to sort of dig into what were the weaknesses of this candidacy. And it'll be very interesting to see in focus groups are more for before an election, but in sort of polls, social scientific polls, the ones which are slightly more secure than the ones you see before an election, as to why people didn't switch from Trump to Biden. Were there people who thought, oh, maybe I would have voted for him if he was a bit more charismatic and he seemed a bit more energetic, but he didn't really seem like he wanted it? It'll be interesting to see if that happens, or people who would say they would have voted for someone who would have campaigned on a more progressive economic platform.
I mean, I'd say one more thing, which is just people are saying, well, Joe Biden got the largest number of votes of anybody in any US election ever. How can you say he had a bad election? Again, it boils down again to coronavirus and this being quite a sui generis situation. First of all, you've had a huge influx of mail-in votes, and effectively, this isn't a national holiday, but this is not like a normal election where people go to work, particularly Democratic voters, especially younger ones, 9 to 5 or shift work, and then they often don't vote later on. So the idea that we've got this massive increase in voter turnout, and Biden has this huge mandate, which he does. He's got the most votes. By the way, Trump will also beat Obama's record from 2008, most likely. I don't think that furnishes him with sort of this high level of legitimacy. It just says, actually, it's quite a unique set of circumstances, and voter turnout was always going to be higher. Yes, partly because it's so polarized around Trump right now, partly, of course, because of the economic situation around coronavirus, but also physically people just have more time to vote, which otherwise wouldn't be the case.
I want to go to a few more updates on the electoral map, actually. So Nate Cohn's done a few. He's the sort of polling guru at the New York Times. Some of you might be wondering whether or not anyone is actually a polling guru. But he's saying in Pennsylvania, they got a bit more data. It narrows Trump's lead to 8 points. Still seems quite big, doesn't it? But he says, to my mind, everything there is still consistent with Biden eventually taking the lead. Again, also the likeliest outcome by far in Arizona is that the remaining ballots are good enough for Biden, but he doesn't think we can be 100% confident until we've seen until we've seen all of them. Yeah, there's clearly going to be.
Both are going to narrow.
Both are going to, yeah, exactly.
That's what we can say with.
Exactly, both are going to narrow. It's going to be tense, but the path to 270 electoral college votes is easier for Biden than it is for Donald Trump. Let's have a look at some super chats. So Chiwiri with a $5. Thank you, Novara Media, for everything, and thank you, James Lone, for getting me fish and chips. We can just get sort of People communicating with their housemates via Tysky Sour. Ellen Mervyn. Oh, we've already shouted out Ellen Mervyn's one. Paul McDaniel with a tenner. Novara's helped keep me. I think we've maybe, in case we haven't, Novara has helped me keep me sane during this difficult year. Thanks and keep up the good work.
Can I just say you've kept us sane? You know, speaking as somebody on the left, I know you feel quite similar to this. You know, without this project, we would have felt you've kept us sane. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, 100%. Because everyone's sort of like, oh, I've got no hope about politics. I'm like, I chat to 3,000 people every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I love it. They're so cool. Anyway, there is hope. We can build a new politics, which will be just as successful as the dying movement behind Joe Biden, which hopefully much more. Joseph Byrne with 20 quid. Last lockdown, I binge watched all old and new Novara media videos. You guys are really worth donating to. Thank you, Michael, for defending us the other day. I will always defend you. A big failure of many left-wing institutions over the last few years has been to not properly defend their members. Always be proud to be on the left. Any chance of more IMO Bastani videos? They were my favourites. Bastani, direct question.
It's a good question, isn't it? Well, we're going to be regularising the interview shows that we do on Novara Media. I had a great interview show last night with Dan Hicks. Very poor timing to be talking about the Benin bronzes and reform of sort of British museums, but there you are. I think it's also quite evergreen, so maybe that's the best. We'll be doing something like that every Tuesday. We've got an interview up with Ash next week, and Ash and I are sort of co-producing that along with Gary. But in terms of the IMOs, look, I think for us, we've had a fantastic year this year. We've got more resources than we had before. We've got more people. We've got the studio. And I'd like to do that. I think basically all of us now can make more content than we did previously because of your kind generosity. So the short answer is yes, it'll take time. We're going to sort of delegate more jobs around and so on, get more workflows in. But Novara Media is here to stay. It's going to be growing, and it's going to hopefully shape politics for the better for a long time to come, including IMO Bastanis.
I'm going to do all the housekeeping in a moment, but stay tuned. Don't tune out, because we're going to show you at the end the person who did call this situation, the oracle, the person who we've trusted all year. You'll find out who it is in a moment. For now, though, Aaron Bastani, it's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you for watching our coverage of the US presidential election results. As ever, to make this show possible, to keep building Novara Media, go to novaramedia.com/support. We'll be back on Friday at 7 p.m. For now, take a look at this clip from someone who called this.
It could well be, and I don't know what's going to happen, nobody does, but it could well be that at 10 o'clock on election night, Trump is winning in Michigan, he's winning in Pennsylvania, he's winning in Wisconsin, and he gets on the television, he says, "Thank you, Americans, for re-electing me. It's all over. Have a good day." But then the next day and the day following, all of those mail-in ballots start getting counted, and it turns out that Biden has won those states. At which point Trump says, "See, I told you the whole thing was fraudulent. I told you those mail-in ballots were crooked, and we're not going to leave office." So that is a worry that I and a lot of people have. So the results, we don't know what's happened. Maybe the results will be on election day, but people should be aware of that possibility.